longer to have things otherwise. And people do so in every prevailing morality and religion, and have always done so. The reasons and intentions behind the habit are only added surreptitiously when people begin to combat the habit, and ask for reasons and intentions. It is here that the great dishonesty of the conservatives of all times hide. They are adventitious liars. 30. The comedy of the celebrated man. Celebrated men who need their fame, as, for instance, all politicians, no longer select their associates and friends without afterthoughts. From the one they want a portion of the splendour and reflection of his virtues, from the other they want the fear-inspiring power of certain dubious qualities in him, of which everybody is aware. From another they steal his reputation for idleness and basking in the sun, because it is advantageous for their own ends to be regarded temporarily as heedless and lazy. It conceals the fact that they lie in ambush. They now use the visionaries, now the experts, now the brooders, now the pedants in the neighbourhood, as their actual selves for the time. But very soon they do not need them any longer. And thus while their environment and outside die off continually, everything seems to crowd into this environment and wants to become a "character" of it. They are like the great cities in this respect. Their repute is continually in a process of mutation, like their character, for their changing methods require this change, and they show and exhibit sometimes this and sometimes that actual or fictitious quality on the stage. Their friends and associates, as we have said, belong to these stage properties. On the other hand, that which they aim at must remain so much the more steadfast and burnished and resplendent in the distance, and this also sometimes needs its comedy and its stage play. 31. Commerce and Nobility. Buying and selling is now regarded as something ordinary, like the art of reading and writing. Everyone is now trained to it, even when he is not a tradesman, exercising himself daily in the art, precisely as formerly in the period of uncivilized humanity, everyone was a hunter, and exercised himself day by day in the art of hunting. Hunting was then something common, but just as this finally became a privilege of the powerful and noble, and thereby lost the character of the commonplace and the ordinary, by ceasing to be necessary, and by becoming an affair of fancy and luxury, so it might become the same some day with buying and selling. Conditions of society are imaginable in which there will be no selling and buying, and in which the necessity for this art will become quite lost. Perhaps it may then happen that individuals who are less subjected to the law of the prevailing condition of things will indulge in buying and selling as a luxury of sentiment. It is then only that commerce would acquire nobility, and the noble would then perhaps occupy themselves just as readily with commerce as they have done hitherto with war and politics, while on the other hand the valuation of politics might then have entirely altered. Already even politics ceases to be the business of a gentleman, and it is possible that one day it may be found to be so vulgar as to be brought, like all party literature and daily literature, under the rubric, "prostitution of the intellect." 32. Undesirable disciples. What should I do with these two youths, called out the philosopher dejectedly, who "corrupted" youths, as Socrates had once corrupted them? They are unwelcome disciples to me. One of them cannot say "nay," and the other says "half and half" to everything. Provided they grasp my doctrine, the former would suffer too much, for my mode of thinking requires a martial soul, willingness to cause pain, delight in denying, and a hard skin. He would succumb by open wounds and internal injuries, and the other would choose the mediocre in everything he represents, and thus make a mediocrity of the whole. I should like my enemy to have such a disciple. 33. Outside the lecture room. Quote, "In order to prove that man after all belongs to the good-natured animals, I would remind you how credulous he has been for so long a time. It is now only, quite late, and after immense self-conquest, that he has become a distrustful animal. Yes, man is now more wicked than ever." End quote. I do not understand this. Why should man now be more distrustful and more wicked? Quote, "Because now he has science, because he needs to have it." Unquote. 34. Historia abscondita. Every great man has a power which operates backward. All history is again placed on the scales on his account, and 1,000 secrets of the past crawl out of their lurking places into his sunlight. There is absolutely no knowing what history may be some day. The past is still perhaps undiscovered in its essence. There are yet so many retroactive powers needed. 35. Heresy and witchcraft. To think otherwise than is customary, that is by no means so much the activity of a better intellect, as the activity of strong, wicked inclinations, severing, isolating, refractory, mischief-loving, malicious inclinations. Heresy is the counterpart of witchcraft, and is certainly just as little a merely harmless affair, or a thing worthy of honour in itself. Heretics and sorcerers are two kinds of bad men. They have it in common that they also feel themselves wicked. Their unconquerable delight is to attack and injure whatever rules, whether it be men or opinions. The Reformation, a kind of duplication of the spirit of the Middle Ages, at a time when it had no longer a good conscience, produced both of these kinds of people in the greatest profusion. 36. Last words. It will be recollected that the Emperor Augustus, that terrible man, who had himself as much in his power, and could be silent as well as any wise Socrates, became indiscreet about himself in his last words. For the first time he let his mask fall, when he gave to understand that he had carried a mask and played a comedy. He had played the father of his country, and wisdom on the throne well, even to the point of illusion. Plaudite amici, commoedia vanita est. The thought of the dying Nero, qualis artifex pero, was also the thought of the dying Augustus. Histrionic conceit, histrionic loquacity, and the very counterpart to the dying Socrates. But Tiberius died silently, that most tortured of all self-torturers. He was genuine, and not a stage player. What may have passed through his head at the end? Perhaps this, quote, "Life, that is a long death. I am a fool who shortened the lives of so many. Was I created for the purpose of being a benefactor? I should have given them eternal life, and then could I have seen them dying eternally. I had such good eyes for that, qualis spectator pero." End quote. When he seemed once more to regain his powers